حيوحنا والله منا بعاد بعالم صار ثلاث بعاد وما منا نتكلم عادي باشياء منا مخبينا الدنيا شريط بينعاد ضد الصلب اللي ما بينعاد ضدين احنا على الميعاد بأرض الحق تلاقينا
When I was 11, I came home from school and saw my furniture scattered across my street in Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in occupied Jerusalem, occupied Palestine. The street overflowed with soldiers, police, and settlers. My neighbors were screaming and protesting, some of them hospitalized. Settlers had invaded our home and taken over half of it. They said it was theirs by divine decree, as if God is a real estate agent. Now, more than a decade later, they're coming to finish what they started. Billionaire-backed settler organizations protected by the Israeli occupation forces will likely throw out my family from our home forever. Not only my family, but hundreds, if not thousands of Palestinians in my neighborhood and other communities like Silwan and Al-Aisawiyya and Masafir Yatta in the South Hebron Hills and elsewhere. This fate of dispossession looms over much of my neighborhood. Our lives are consumed by the anxiety of living on the brink of homelessness. The UN has called this a war crime, but more importantly, I know that this is theft. My community, like all Palestinian communities, is no stranger to dispossession. My grandmother was expelled from her home in Haifa in 1948 when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced in the Nakba. She found refuge in the 50s after the United Nations, you all, and Jordan built a housing project in Sheikh Jarrah, promising that the 28 refugee families would receive legal title to their properties. Then the 1967 war happened. After Israeli forces illegally annexed Jerusalem, several settler organizations, some of which headquartered in the United States, have relentlessly attempted to take over the neighborhood. We obviously tried to fight this forced expulsion in court. But as my grandmother used to say, if the judge is your enemy, to whom do you complain? Israeli land grabbing has been rubber-coated with legislation, making it almost impossible to challenge. Even so, the battle over Sheikh Jarrah is not legal in its essence. It is political. It is part of the larger systematic effort to Israelize the entirety of Jerusalem, my native city. My family and our neighbors understand this. We know firsthand that the Israeli judicial system is created by and for those who benefit endlessly from the Israeli settler colonial regime. As I speak to you, our family lawyer is attempting to persuade a settler judge to rule against settlements. The word apartheid comes to mind, but saying there's asymmetry and injustice in the Israeli judicial system is a gross understatement. What we have on our hands is a colonialist, ideologically driven system built by and for colonizers, working exactly as it was intended to. These unjust laws are not preferential, serving the demographic and political goals of the Zionist project. They are concealed behind a cloak of quasi-democratic, seemingly disputable legislation. This summer, we took our struggle to the streets. Our efforts to resist this takeover were joined by Palestinians across Jerusalem and the world in what became known as the Unity Uprising. The situation rapidly escalated into attacks on besieged Gaza. Palestinians mobilized and resisted, and around the world, people demonstrated in support of the Palestinian right to liberation and decolonization. But months later, the world's attention has moved away. The reality for Palestinians, however, has not changed. Our neighborhood was put under a blockade for 3 months, maintained by Israeli forces with continuing restrictions intended to suffocate the lives of the hundreds of Palestinians who live there. And yet, meanwhile, armed Jewish settlers who have already occupied some of our homes roam freely on the streets, no questions asked. On any given night, a dozen gun-wielding fanatics patrol my street with arrogant impunity. They are protected, even supported, by the troops blockading our community. I have to take a minute to acknowledge the millions under siege in the Gaza Strip, the millions living in an open-air prison. I have to acknowledge the thousands of Palestinian prisoners subjugated in Israeli prisons. I have to acknowledge my neighbor, Murad Atiyeh, an elementary school teacher who was robbed from his family and put into prison, slapped with trumped-up and fabricated charges only because he dared say no to ethnic cleansing. You know, I have to ask, what is it that I can say today that has not been said before? How many Palestinians have stood on this platform for decades and decried the same broken promises and unfulfilled UN resolutions? How many of us have tried to articulate the atrocities that everyone in this body knows very well and still ignores? At a certain point in every Palestinian's life, we realize that the Nakba is far from over. It continues every time the Israeli occupation revokes Jerusalem residencies. It blares in street signs stripped of Arabic. It punctures us in constant campaigns of dehumanization. If you're not thrown out of your home, it's demolished. If you're not imprisoned, you're shot in the street. If you're not shot in the street, there's a drone in your sky in the Gaza Strip. If it's not a bomb, it's exile. I am tired of reporting on the same brutality every day, of thinking of new ways to describe the obvious. The situation in my neighborhood, Sheikh Jarrah, is not hard to understand. It is a perfect microcosm of settler colonialism. The reality that Palestinians across 70 years of Zionist rule have experienced. This vocabulary is not theoretical. It is evident in the attempts to throw us out of our homes so that settlers can occupy them, with the backing of the regime whose forces and policies provide violent support for the transfer of one population to install another. I do not care whom this terminology offends. Colonial is the correct way of referring to a state whose forces collude in the violence of settlers, whose government works with settler organizations, whose judicial system uses expansionist laws to claim our homes, whose nation-state law enshrines Jewish settlements as a national value to encourage and promote. The appetite for Palestinian lands without Palestinians has not abated for even 7 decades. I know this because I live it. I have no faith in the Israeli judicial system. It is part of the settler colonial state built by settlers for settlers. Nor do I expect any of the international governments who have been deeply complicit in the Israeli colonial enterprise to intervene on our behalf. But I do have faith in people around the world, in your citizens, who protest and pressure governments to end what is essentially unconditional support for Israeli policies of ethnic cleansing. Impunity and war crimes will not be stopped by statements of condemnation and raised eyebrows. It will not be stopped by tweets of concerns. We have repeatedly articulated what kind of transformative political measures must be taken. Boycotts and state-level sanction. The problem, again, is not ignorance. It is inaction. The United States has vetoed more than 53 Security Council resolutions critical of Israel. In fact, more than half of the vetoes that the US casted were in favor of Israel. How long must we offer the Israeli occupation impunity? Negotiations are not going to bring about peace. Ending impunity, well. You know, when we reflect on history's most horrible, most inhumane atrocities today, we think of them with so much moral clarity. So much moral clarity that we tend to forget that when these atrocities were happening, they were perfectly legal. not only perfectly legal, but at the time that they were happening, they were all once controversial, contested, too complex. People talked with neutral language like we do today. We all think that had it been us there back then, at that point of time, we would have been at the right side of history. And we have that opportunity today to be on the right side of history. I am asking all of you to be brave. The question of Palestine cannot be resolved without a freed Palestine. I know that the occupation will end. Like all injustices, it will end. It must. All empires fall. The Palestinian cause will erupt victorious. I know this. I know that people will look back at the reality we live through today with so much moral clarity. One day there will be museums honoring us, memorials in our remembrance, and statues built in our names. People will stand atop our lands and acknowledge the suffering that happened in them. I just hope that such recognition, such recourse, such reparations happen while the Palestinian people are still here. We deserve justice and liberation within our lifetime. We deserve our land back. Thank you very much.
مكوك عالخط مكوك عالخط وانا امشي شكوا مني وحربتي شرمين وحرقتي ضرطة 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 اركب عكتافي وانا امشي
بتقولك بتوقف بس زق ودور
Gaza particularly, the first thing that comes into mind is like, you know, the systematic challenges that face farmers, women and men farmers in Gaza, whether it's, you know, the problems in terms of like climate change or the challenges that comes into like the daily worry of the farmer in terms of like production and what can happen to the yield that they farm and the prices within the market. And we can like dive into like a huge list of challenges that could look very technical from the surface, but really looking at each of these challenges and like diving deep into them, you will understand how politicized, how political these challenges are. For example, when we look at Gaza, even before 1948, and Gaza, as it was used to know, it was not only limited to the Gaza Strip. Actually, Gaza Strip was a very small proportion from what has been known as Qada Gaza at that time. And if you look at that reality of Gaza at that time and the amount of agricultural labor that used to be done, the products that used to be produced, particularly in terms of barley and wheat and the exportation of these products, and how it's relevant to people's daily life, how it was a fundamental part of their identity. And then when you look at agricultural now and you see how over the past few centuries, like the past few decades, there has been a huge gap in the detachment that Palestinian in Gaza has had to the land, and it's a very natural in terms of. It's very natural if you look at what kind of systematic processes has the occupation put in place to ensure that this detachment and that gap is widening every single day. In the past, agriculture has been part, as I said, from the identity. It was not an act of, you know, income generation by itself. It was an act of like building social cohesion. It was an act of like, you know, coming together and also having a national identity. But now agriculture has been reduced to only a labor that you can do in order to have an income. And even the occupation has systematically made that income that is coming from agriculture as not something that is sustainable. And that's why we see a lot of young people leaving agriculture. And I keep saying that if we look at our older generation, like my grandparents, your grandparents, for them to sell a land for living was not even a question. Like it was a red line that nobody even tried to think about it. But now the political and the economic collapse within Gaza is pushing people to the point that they would sell a piece of land because they have nothing to eat. And that kind of put a lot of people into a trip of guilt towards to what extent I am having to make a choice between you know, survival, but also between like feeling that I have failed my identity, my Palestinian national even participation. And looking at Gaza, what we are seeing is the agricultural spaces is diminishing. You were asking me about my village, Zawaida. It's a small village in Gaza, and you asked me about whether it's as green as always, and unfortunately it's not. And it's really something that pains me and pains a lot of Palestinians, that we are no longer seeing the green areas that we used to see. We are no longer seeing the trees that used to decorate the streets, that had like so much memory in it, that was also spaces for Palestinians to hide when they were fighting against the occupation, and also a symbol of their existence to the land.
Thank you so much, Asma. And hearing some of the things that you said made me really think I personally am from Gaza originally, and although I've been away for a decade, I personally don't know what the state of access to food is like in the Gaza Strip today. How much of what is being produced in Gaza comes from Gaza, and how much is imported from the outside. So this is something, and how much of the agricultural production in Gaza goes into products that are exported to the outside markets. But we'll get to that point shortly. I would like to talk to Mohammed a little bit about the notion of food sovereignty, which Mohammed, you center this notion in your work in a consistent manner. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what does food sovereignty mean in the context of the Palestinian struggle for liberation in general, but also in Gaza's context. As part of Gaza's survival, struggle for survival, but also as part of Gaza's grappling with some of the issues Asma talked about, including access to very limited natural resources, mainly land and water, and this diminishing agricultural space. So how can we talk about food sovereignty in light of all of these factors?
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you, Adale. Thank you, AFC. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Asma, for being here. It's actually really lovely to see people from a very small area, like from the middle area of Gaza Strip. They from all our neighbors, Jihad and Asma. The topic, I feel like, of food sovereignty, it really has a lot of tentacles to it and so on that are very different than the topic of food security that I feel like has turned so many of us and the population in Palestine and so on to just mere numbers, and mere calories and macro and micro sort of nutrients that basically, they do accounting for whether the occupation or UNRWA, and that is about it. But like food sovereignty is really about the choice, the production and consumption cycle, or basically of food, of culturally relevant foods that happen to be relevant ecologically, happen to be relevant culturally, happen to be relevant economically. So it's and the intersection between this topic and Gaza Strip as current experiment, and probably one of the most important liberation experiments that we had in our Palestinian history, one that gets dismissed or put in a square usually, or a box that just limits it to certain events, or like, the sort of crisis attention cycles, while sovereignty in general as a topic or as an experiment, as something that we seek, and usually it's something that we look at as, that basically is this resistance phase that we go through, and there's this sovereignty phase of building, a national character or a view of self that we go through. But in these long running struggles, we can't afford to actually relegate it to a later stage. We can't do that. Indigenous folks here in the US cannot do that. Black Americans cannot do that. So we end up basically having to entangle our struggles, our resistance, that is basically the frameworks and sensibilities and our intuition in our resistance stage is very different than our intuition in the sovereignty stage, where we actually need multiple experiments. We need to explore who we are and our character and what we do and what we like and what we don't like, what is relevant to us and what's not relevant to us. And this intermingling overlap of these two experiments and so on make it very difficult actually to go and weed through, especially with these efforts of aborting or basically of funding certain parts or certain parties in the Palestinian liberation movement in general, since it's really spread on a spectrum. And basically that becomes a sort of a sabotaging effort to basically the rest of the sovereignty effort. So we've been in a way, in Gaza Strip, we've been surrounded by this real difficult siege since 2007. But at the same time, we've been afforded this experiment that we're paying dearly for. It's true that we're that basically on the general politically correct sort of spectrum that we're seeing that Palestinians coming back together is basically the path that we're looking for. But in a sense, that relegates us to a lower bar in a sense of liberation, where Gaza has actually had taken strides forward since 2007, while we see the politics in the West Bank being stagnant around pre-2007 politics, and the PA making efforts of resistance and so on that actually push our society forward and push our efforts of sovereignty forward, sort of basically locking them in the same box pre-2007. And that was actually pretty self-evident when I was in Gaza in January. Did a lot of the work and sort of had a chance to meet with a lot of people and see and be in touch with a lot of these really dear experiments that we needed to go through. And one of them was meeting with Dr. Mohammed Al-Agha, the ex-minister of agriculture that was basically there in the period 2006 and 2012. And he passed one of a printed copy of the strategy of the Minister of Agriculture to me, and just the going through certain things and going through actually chapters that talk about like resistance agriculture as part of a 10-year strategy for Gaza Strip and so on is one of the most uplifting, and actually seeing effects of it on the ground, seeing effects on it on watermelon agriculture, on fisheries, on olives and so on. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this kind of production and so on. So sovereignty is basically this kind of basically self discovery that we really need to engage in our efforts. That goes beyond just production, that goes beyond, that food sovereignty is this marriage between what we care about in land and so on, and what we care about and what's relevant to us in culture. This could produce this space of work that we need, that we need in a sense to elevate our agency and our voice, in our livelihood.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. This is great, and I'm sure the people in the audience are interested in hearing more about your recent trip to Gaza and your discoveries there. But let me, circle back to putting Gaza, to providing a little bit of context so that we can talk more about Gaza's present. You addressed the past a little bit, you talk about the present, but let's talk a little bit about the future and conversations about the future today, whether in Palestine or elsewhere, cannot happen without talking about climate change, without talking about how societies will provide for themselves. Just to repeat what I said earlier, the Gaza Strip is a very small geographic area. It's the total area of the Gaza Strip is 140 square miles. That is equivalent to the total area of metropolitan Detroit. But imagine metropolitan Detroit as an area that is isolated from its surroundings. So there is no access to further land beyond the confines of this blockaded metropolitan Detroit. Okay, so there are 2 million, more than 2 million people now who live in the Gaza Strip, and by 2050, this number is expected to double. The rate of population density now is around 6,000 plus per 1 square kilometer. We're talking about 13,000 per 1 square mile. By 2050, the population density in Gaza will be around 35,000 human beings per 1 square mile. What are the How are people going to survive? we're talking about a huge growth of population in a very limited area. How are people providing for themselves now, and what will happen in this very near future? I mean, to put 30 years in perspective, it's been 30 years since Oslo. So Asma, what is the discourse? What are some of the conversations around the future of land and agriculture and food in Gaza today? And what are some of the projects that are happening to address that?
Thank you, Jihad. I think you've touched upon the climate change, and it's important to understand how climate change is affecting people in Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza. Now, what we are seeing is diverse impact when it comes to climate change. So you will have like very clear-cut impact of having extreme heat waves that affect both like agriculture, but also affect the population. And you've mentioned the population density, Jihad. And if you walk in the summer during these heat waves in the Palestinian camps that exist in the Gaza Strip, what you will see is so much, considering also the electricity cuts, you will see so much problems that people are facing and children are facing, from like skin diseases due to heat, but also from like food spoilage because there is no electricity, so that people can store their food into their fridge. And that's very problematic because the Palestinian family in Gaza cannot do like purchases in bulks because there has to be electricity so that they can save. So they cannot save on the little money and the income they have by purchasing in bulk. What they have to do is do daily purchases. And the daily purchases of like foods and vegetables and fruits, in order to survive the electricity cut, it means that there is no way of saving from that income. So you are either between like financial burdens or like between more expenditure that is spent onto food. And we are seeing how Palestinian families, as part of coping mechanism, are utilizing a lot of like instant food, like the amount of noodles, and during COVID, noodles was one of the main products that has a huge purchase in the Palestinian Gaza market that has been produced because it's cheap. It's very instant, and like it can make a person who's hungry like feeling a bit of satisfaction in terms of food. So you have that kind of impact on family, but also you have a collapsed health system. So even if you are facing a lot of like heat-borne diseases, like with your children, what kind of health sector that can absorb or even support families in navigating these diseases? And that's only on the family level. But if you want to look at agricultural level, what we are seeing with the heat wave, and this year we will see it particularly in the palm trees and in the olive trees, studies that has been conducted are showing the huge impact, adverse impact on olive, on grape, that has been part of Gaza signature for like centuries, Gaza grape, and like that also goes into history books about how amazing the quality of the grape. Now, considering that, while also looking at the water issues in Gaza, so in the southern area in Gaza, we have high water salinity, more likely to have droughts in like areas like Rafah. So what we are seeing is that huge farms of grape, huge farms of stone fruits are currently dying because there is no other alternatives, like the water salinity, the heat wave, and the whole agricultural scene in Gaza is not prepared in terms of like, adopting high-tech, let's say, technologies that can fight with the water salinity. And to look at that, one last example, to look at how the occupation is adding into this is something very important. So you know that recently there has been, after 4 years and a half, building the smart fence across Gaza that goes underneath Gaza and like on top of Gaza. Yes. Now that fence it's actually going 30 meters underground. And that affects a lot, like the amount of water aquifer or even water slide into the Gaza aquifer. So any kind of recharging to that aquifer, considering the high demand in water for domestic as well as for agriculture, is gonna have a long-term impact. So if you visit Gaza now, you will see very diminishing spaces of grape, of olive, of palm trees, and a high dependency on vegetables and high-end.
It seems like we
agricultural areas in the Gaza Strip, considering that the access restricted area, which is existing in the eastern part of Gaza, it's not allowed to be fully utilized. And it is the most fertile agricultural land that exists in Gaza.
And this is near the buffer zone to the east.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mohammed, if you have anything to say about this, we would really appreciate it.
It's just putting it in context, and this is the extraordinary nature of Gaza Strip, is that basically we have a population in Gaza Strip now that is more than the estimated population of historic Palestine pre-48. And if you're looking at basically the available lands for this area, the 170,000 dunams, and it was said to be expanded after Israelis emptied the settlements in Gaza Strip to 190,000. If I'm putting this in context, this is 1/5 of the lands that were planted with wheat in historic Palestine. Just field crop, a single field crop, was 5 times bigger than the amount of land that is available for people in Gaza Strip. And so this actually creates this huge challenge, like for people feeding themselves, and actually because it is carved out as this separate political identity that has no chances of surviving on its own. It's really important to see like how limited, and as we just mentioned, actually 30% of these lands are around the buffer zone where it has restricted access, where people cannot really use it freely the way that you could, if a war happens, you lost your crop, and it's challenging because as well, it's the south of Gaza gets half of the rainfall that the north of it, like Rafah and Khan Younis, where a lot of these agricultural lands can't really be without irrigation. And to quote some of the Palestinian Authority, like basically even in the 2000s, it was believed that Israel, when they left Gaza Strip in '94, they haven't even left like water to be used, like good water to be used in Gaza Strip, because a lot of the agriculture, and this is the extraordinary part about the agriculture in Gaza Strip, like the 6% of Palestine, of the Palestinian territory area, basically of the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. Gaza is just a 6% of this entire area, but produces the cash yields, the crop cash yields, the Gaza Strip go upwards of 25 and 30% of the entire cash yields of the Palestinian authorities. So this actually begs the question: how does this happen? Like this extraordinary nature of the agriculture in Gaza has been always geared towards producing vegetables for Israeli market, because until today, 10 years ago, it has been the same thing, that basically you can pay 20 shekels, which is like $5 or $6 like for a day for an agricultural worker, while they can command 10 and 20 times that amount in Israel. So you get basically these cheaper crops that can be exported in lieu of cash. So the agriculture in Gaza has been concentrating on this vegetable production that produces enough cash for people to survive, because it doesn't make any sense for them to produce wheat. There is no enough land to feed themselves. So we end up basically importing on the entire, if we project that conversation, the entire area, like West Bank and Gaza as well, like we don't have it's estimated to be 1.5 to 1.9 million dunams, which is as well equivalent a little bit more than the amount of lands that we planted with wheat in prehistoric Palestine. So it's, you know, we can't even plant our own wheat in the territories, the entire area in the West Bank and Gaza. So the whole equation doesn't really add up, you know, and the way it's been affecting, particularly water in the aquifer in Gaza Strip, goes back even to the 90s, not from today. So I just cannot forget when I was heading out of Gaza and we're in Rafah borders, and I headed out to the washroom to wash, and I just tasted the water that came from the tap, and it was like seawater was coming out of the tap with the tap water. It's impossible, and this is the feeling that you get across multiple areas of Gaza Strip, and including Deir al-Balah, including other areas where basically irrigation is used for certain things like olive production and palm production. And these crops are actually saline, they can resist a level of salt in the water and so on, but the heat wave, as Esma was mentioning, last year, Gaza had to import, like 2 years ago, Gaza actually was experimenting with exporting some of their olives because of this whole experiment of planting olive trees in Gaza that actually produced enough oil in 2019 to, you know, to cover Gaza Strip's needs and to be able to export it. But last year, and that was actually the effect of the heat wave, that was very unlikely in Palestine to have 2 bad years of olive production. And 2020 was bad. 2021, we produced 35% of the yield that was there in 2019. And that was just a straight result out of basically environmental impact of the heat wave.
And Jihad, if you allow me to build on Muhammad's point, Muhammad talks about like how in Gaza, it is necessary to produce actually cash crops because that's the only way of like, you know, having income. But even the choices of like what cash crops to produce, it's not even Palestinian decision. If we look at, you know, the Gaza is usually associated with strawberries. If you look at the strawberry, it's a complete example of, you know, colonial agriculture where even a strawberry production in Gaza was very influenced by Israel, the strawberry and flower, because they want to enter international markets and they want to have products entering that. So Gaza was like basically the testing grounds where, as Muhammad mentioned, it's very cheap labor, but also the environmental impact on the water aquifer was a risk that Gaza should take, not like the Israelis should not take. And while they were testing on what's the best way to produce a strawberry that meets international markets but does not damage the environment. So until they had a brand or they already had like a market share in European markets and international markets, and they succeeded in producing a strawberry that does not, you know, harm the environment for them, then they decided to, like, you know, mitigate the amount of strawberry and flowers that is being produced in Gaza or being actually traded outside Gaza. And the past 2 years, we are seeing Jihad, the flower farmers are actually throwing these flowers to the cattle because it's not even profitable to sell it in local markets. So it's easier to have it like fodder for cows and goats rather than selling it into the market. And that's not something happening in haphazard, something that is very planned for in order to create a class of Palestinian who suddenly have an increased income because of like new cash crops that is being piloted. And then like once they reach to the point where like there is a thinking of like, you know, shifting to other alternative agricultural, that kind of like income sources being stopped.
And I remember that, I mean, also like looking at the history of agriculture in Palestine, people romanticize the citrus, trees, and there is a long history to how citrus played a positive role in our history, but also had negative effects on the Palestinian economy. And I grew up hearing my father saying that my grandfather, who had a large citrus grove, and who used to go and sell his produce in Jaffa, after 48, he ended up basically struggling, not knowing, with the Egyptian market didn't have the same amount of demand that international markets that they used to export to through Jaffa. And then after 67, they uprooted the citrus trees to replace them with greenhouses to basically, address demand from Israeli markets. So the history goes, back to even before 1948. I still have many questions, but there are questions from our members of the audience. So if you don't mind, I will read some of the questions, and please feel free to either of you to answer them or to add. So we have a question from Rawan Qaddura about the issue of class divisions, which I think is very important. So basically the question is about how does food sovereignty and material realities shift between classes in Gaza, and how do electricity cuts impact lower class Gazans versus upper class ones? I don't know, how do we approach this question, given that some struggles can be universal, but also there are really there are huge discrepancies in people's access to these things. So I see, Muhammad, I see that you unmuted yourself. So if you'd like to answer this question.
Yeah, I'll quickly, I don't know if somebody was marking that they want to answer this as well. We have to note, and this actually goes to Asma's comment in the beginning, that Gaza Strip is just a sliver of what Gaza used to be. It's actually a sliver that is taken from both Beit al-Sabra and Gaza Strip. Majority of farmers in Gaza Strip have no access to land. They come from Fallahin, basically they're refugees. Majority, and this is a very long and very important, and this actually has happened in the past to be an entry point for a lot of the politics with the British were around, when the Israelis as well have tried to utilize that gap, that lack of social justice sort of gap. In the shadows or underbelly, in the sense of an occupation, a lot of layers of social justice go missing, because it's very hard to actually attempt to solve them, and becomes that basically breeding ground to dissect and break Palestinians even further. And that was like the topic of Hizb al-Zurra and Rawabit al-Qura and so on, actually to create that sort of gap between the rural and urban sort of communities, leadership, and so on in Palestine. But Gaza Strip, even today, 10% or so, maybe 15% today, host almost half of the population of Gaza Strip. If we're talking about population densities and so on, if we count or we look at the refugee camps and their population sizes and so on. I live in Maghazi refugee camp, and I'm there. Our neighbors in Zawaidi. When I was a kid, I remember walking over to Zawaidi, and I was like astonished as a kid. It was like, wow, there's so much space here, not as many people. Why, what gives? Why is it in the camp different? Why is it so populated and so heavily populated and so on? And yeah, the distribution of lands and where people live, and especially in Gaza Strip, gets to the extremes, like in Jabalia refugee camp, where the population goes way beyond the 15,000 mark per square mile. So it becomes this. We have big gaps in social justice and the distribution of even access to food, access to land, access. If you go to the north to Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, where people have access to these lands and they can work and produce cash crops and sell them, you'll go south and you'll find people don't have access to even smaller parcels to plant, very simple things for themselves.
It's worth mentioning here that when we say north and south, we're talking about the span of 40 kilometers.
Yes, yes.
In miles, I think around 25 miles, right? So
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing that we're talking about this spread in north, but because it's that densely populated, has that many refugee camps and so on. So you can really easily write off people in the refugee. And I had this conversation. Actually, these become more pronounced once you see the work international organization, other organizations try to create some impact. They would target they call these marginal groups that they cannot target because there's no amount for them. There's no amount of work that actually can get them to the level of food production, in a sense. Right. So they would target groups that have, in a sense, and in the context of Gaza service is weird to say, but in a sense, some wealth to sit on, some lands to sit on that actually can, put some birds on the roof to produce, or actually plant this extra area. Well, it would take a lot more effort to actually make somebody from the refugee camp productive in that sense. So that actually builds on top and makes the stratification, the social stratification, much worse in Gaza Strip, unfortunately.
Thanks, Mohammed. We have 10 minutes left, 9 minutes actually. And I have 3 questions here. One of them is for both of you. So I'd start with this question, and it would be great if Asma can answer. So the question basically is from Dallas Robinson, and Dallas thanks you for your input, and is asking you to speak about any agricultural cooperative practices rooted in or practiced around agriculture in Gaza and Palestine overall. So projects and initiatives that are ongoing and they're trying to address some of these issues that we talked about. So if you can take like 2 minutes each to answer this question, and then we can go back to the other 2.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at like cooperatives work in Palestine, and I think honestly believe that in the West Bank, the cooperative work and space is more well developed compared to Gaza. But that's also due to different factors. And I'll just give an example of like a farmer cooperative in Khan Younis. The owner actually was showing me receipts of that he used to, the cooperative used to issue in 1956. And that cooperative has been in existence even before 1948. Now, they were doing a lot of agricultural work and supporting farmers in the area of Khan Younis. Now, the challenge is the more we have aid in Gaza, the more disruption to the cooperative work is happening. And the trend that we are seeing is that cooperative to some extent are becoming a small NGOs with lots of power influence into them. But there is also other barriers to the cooperatives, particularly agricultural cooperatives in terms of Gaza and in terms of trading their products outside Gaza and selling. And I shared the example of the tomato. So, lots of agricultural farmers, they plant tomato to be traded either with the West Bank or, other places. Now, the Israelis put restriction on the selling of tomato, that you have to remove the green part of the tomato. Now that reduces the shelf of the tomato by half. Now, if you have this tomato staying at the crossing for a couple of days, then you will have a huge losses that is happening. But what we are seeing is that there is a lot of aid money trying to support agriculture in Palestine. The initiative that really look at agroecology in Gaza, it's a very individual initiatives. So we have examples of people supporting local seeds production and local seeds banks, and we have other people trying, particularly young people, organizing around cooperative work. But to be honest, and Mohammed can reflect on that, I think the work in the West Bank is much more mature compared to Gaza. And that's also related to the extent to which there are spaces for building such a movement in Gaza and accessing a lot of knowledge into that.
Thank you.
فمي غنوا نازفوني ورقصوا معي خذوا يدي خذوا يدي الأمس شهيد اليوم رهين فخذوا غدي خذوا يدي ورقصوا معي
بديش نجوم ساقطة بديش أمنيات بديش عودات بديش معجزات محتاج أنا أمل اتخاذ قرارات محتاج درايف كبنات سعوديات لا عهل سعودي ولا وعد إنجليزي فوضت لحد ما كله طلع من طيزي فوضت لحد ما ضاع المفتاح من إيدي مش عهد تميم أنا بعهد تميمي
خدي يدي خدي يدي الأمس شهيد اليوم رهينة فخدي غدي خدي يدي كوني فمي غني نعزفيني رقصي معي يا بنكمل حكي يا منبلش بالإصغاء يا بتحلق بالسماء يا ضرقع بالحذاء المتجوز القضية وعم بتطلق بالتلات يا بتصلح الشباب يا بسلح النساء فنزال نزال يا خيال نزال من اللي وظفك تقاوم لحال فيش ليلة حمرا بتستنى الصياد في ليلة خالة بتتحدى الذئاب فيني رقصي معي
عربي جديد بوطيش لحد هون خبي البخشيش مفيش خوف لا من ملك أو أعتى زعيم نقطة في البلح من أعلى النخيل مستقيم بلا ما خاف جهنم منيح بلا وعود الجنة بيزنيش البنت دي تسوق سيارة طيارة شاحنة أو كارة تبوس مين بدها تسيب مين بدها ترقص كيف بدها هي المهم مش انت شايف في الأسود زي الأبيض الدم تسير الدم اللي تجلط الحطة جوهر مش منظر حتى الأحلام تتحقق عربي جديد بحاول آخر لحظة مشي بهوليوود بموتش من أول طلقة
خذوا يدي خذوا يدي خذوا يدي كلوا فمي
غني نعزفيني رقصي معي
بلا ضغط بلا كبت بلا غصب حيو قراري حيو حيو حبيبتي حيو حيو حريتي حيو حيو حيو
انت نجوزك يمها وانا ليرة انت نتركض يمها وانا بيتكوين انت نجوزك يمها والبنك يتصلي انت نتيجي عنا
بلا ربط بلا ضغط بلا غصب بلا كبت بلا ربط بلا ضغط بلا غصب بلا كبت
Our heart is with you, and our heart is with everyone in Gaza. Amen. I'm so grateful to share this platform with you. We've been struggling together. We've been in DC a lot together, putting together different actions. And I'm hoping that today will show you that it's not so hard to organize. It really is a matter of relationship building. You don't need leaders. You just need close friends. You need people that share your message about a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, and dignity and freedom for Palestinians. And anyone can organize. Anyone can organize. And so I'm hoping that today, through this conversation, we can give you the confidence to go forward and give you some tools that will help you do just that, to take action. I'm going to share my screen because I want to show you that, it seems like a very, difficult time right now, but I just want to show that you're not alone. Data for Progress did a poll 8 days ago, and I'm really be interested in how this has changed since then, because the pictures and the news coming out of Gaza is so grim. But it shows that a majority of voters are not in favor of continuing violence in Gaza. What is interesting is that it does show that 80% of Democratic voters are strongly against continued violence, are calling for a ceasefire. And even a majority of Republicans are in favor of a ceasefire. I think this is really important for us to remember as we are pushing our lawmakers, saying that, we are not a minority. Palestinians are not alone in calling for a ceasefire. It's not just a Muslim issue. This is an issue for all Americans. Especially now as we are thinking about how quickly the US has, turned to giving billions and billions of dollars to weapons in an era when we saw that there was no response for COVID. There's been no infrastructure for housing. There's been no healthcare investments. These are the things that we've known for so long. There's always money to invest in harm and divest in death, and no money for life-affirming policies. And so I think that that's part of our messaging as well, because I think that what we're seeing is that brown and Black populations in the US have automatically seen affinity toward a Palestinian position on this issue. And I think we'll continue to see that grow. I just want to let y'all know that we have been flooding Congress with letters, phone calls. This is all thanks to you. Just with our letter tool on GazaIsPalestine.com, We have sent over 250,000 letters to Congress. I know Iman will have similar numbers from the US campaign. They're hearing from us. And I just want to emphasize that it's really important to keep writing, keep calling. Today, I called my senator like 5 times. I don't want them to think they can get away with this. I want to make sure that they're logging the numbers. They don't know how many, they don't know exactly that you're the same person that's called, but they will be able to track numbers and to say, you know, we're hearing overwhelmingly for a ceasefire. I know that some of you, many of you have heard that our Jewish allies have been on the streets and really taking bold action as we speak. I don't know, the live stream was very loud, and Grand Central Station in New York is full of young Jews who are closing down the train station. I think at least 1,000 people are risking arrest tonight in New York. This builds on actions that happened this past week at the White House, led by If Not Now, and at the Capitol Rotunda with Jewish Voice for Peace. Over 300 people were arrested at the Capitol, including my daughter, proud of her. She joined the Jewish contingent to say a ceasefire. And then there have been different tactics, you know, in New York, also mass civil disobedience. Hundreds of people were arrested at Senator Gillibrand's office. There was really good news coverage of that in the pouring rain. We've been bird dogging different members of Congress in Chicago. Youth were disrupting a visit by Senator Duckworth to a mosque. And then different groups have been staging sit-ins at different offices. And, you know, this is a picture of a sit-in that Adalah Justice Project organized with dissenters in Ro Khanna's office. In Chicago, for a long time, they've been sitting in at Jen Schakowsky's office. And then Iman and I will talk a little bit about an action we took at Hakeem Jeffries' office this past week as well. It's been inspiring, and it's been interesting to see the kind of like response we're getting. For instance, when we were at Ro Khanna's office, there was no police. They did not call Capitol Police. They definitely did not want media. A media story of young people being dragged out of the office. So we occupied the office for 4 hours. And we basically took over the office. We used the representative's office for private meetings away from staff. They were just like very scared that they were going to get bad headlines based on what we were doing. You know, we chose Ro Khanna as a target, largely because, you know, he represents himself as a progressive. He was very, very vocal in opposing Saudi bombings of Yemen. And he has not signed on to the ceasefire resolution that's being led by Cori Bush. So I think there are lots of vulnerabilities, and we have to keep pushing these progressive lawmakers. So we can give you some ideas about targets if you're interested in hearing more about that. Let's see if I can move ahead. Yeah. So I mentioned that we were involved in a sit-in, a pray-in actually, at Hakeem Jeffries' office. Hakeem Jeffries is the minority House leader. He is a Black lawmaker who was raised in the Baptist church and, you know, likes to talk about his faith a lot. And so we took Black ministers, Black Baptist ministers to his office, an imam, a rabbi, and an interfaith delegation that went to him to say, the world is watching, ceasefire is the moral choice. And it was a very powerful convening, and you can see, you know, we were very prayerful. We sang and we recited the names of 200 of the martyrs from Gaza. We could have been there all day if we were to recite all the names, and it might be something we want to do in the future, to take Capitol and announce all the names for however long it takes. And we also put up these notes on Hakeem Jeffries' placard to remind him of the people that have been killed. And you can see, you know, so many of the people have the same last name. You know, you have a Shahabi family, someone, you know, Mustafa Shahabi, 96, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Aisha Shahabi, 4 years old. And, you know, this is a very effective way of bringing home the cost of this terrible, terrible genocide they're carrying out and supporting. And so I just want to close to say that we have developed a website. Jihad knows we've been campaigning on Gaza for some time. And in 2021, we launched a campaign called Gaza is Palestine. And if you go to GazaIsPalestine.com now, we have created a resource hub that will allow you to write to your representatives. It will allow you to tweet at your members of Congress if you use Twitter or use X, however you want to refer to it. And it has other resources like how to organize within your school. Say your school has put out a really biased, statement that's anti-Palestinian. It hasn't acknowledged the loss of Palestinian life. There's some resources there that give you advice on how to deal with that. And then other ideas, in addition to the pray-ins that we've talked about, you can do these kinds of actions in district. You don't have to be in DC to do this. You can also do sit-ins in district. And then like I said at the beginning, I encourage you to organize within your own communities. You can organize within your church, within your school, within your workplace, within your union. I've seen groups popping up, moms for ceasefire, children for ceasefire, librarians for ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. So you all have a role to play. You all have communities, you all have friends. And so I just encourage you to, take that power that we have and show up as best you can. And I just close and say that we're all going to be in DC on November 4th for a national mobilization, national march on Washington. And so if you can be in Washington, we would love to see you there. Obviously, not everyone can make it there. If there are affinity protests in your local, in your local locales, let us know about them. You can go to GazaIsPalestine.com and you can enter your protest so that we can get the word out about what's happening in different cities. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Iman.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, let me share my screen. Let's go. Let me make sure. Okay, should be showing up. Great. So again, I am also deeply honored to be here alongside Sandra and Jihad. And I know that this conversation is quite somber as we are facing quite the genocide and the atrocity that I think many of us maybe have at one point anticipated, but didn't think would happen so soon. And I think that unfortunately, due to the oppressive structures and the apartheid system that we know many of us have been calling to end, that so long as it continued to exist, that one day or another, this level of atrocity would one day happen. And so as I speak to you all today, I sit with so many mixed emotions and feelings. I think that many of us are feeling paralyzed. I think maybe even disassociating from the level of atrocity of information that we've been receiving. I know that many of us, it sounds like, and I hold my heart for Jihad, who has been doing such incredible work and also has family back home in Gaza. And so I want to say that as a Palestinian who does have family in the West Bank, but not necessarily in Gaza, I hold up our people and I hold up one another in all of this work that we do. And while we may be exhausted as we continue to advocate, and sometimes it feels like maybe we're screaming into a void, the reality is that the work and the pressure that we are continuing to put back onto people like Congress and the president and the international community is actually working. And I know that sometimes it's hard to see because the numbers of people who are dying is not necessarily matching up with what we are seeing or what we're necessarily pursuing, in Congress. And so my hope is that one thing that we can instill in folks again is that the reality is people power works, and us stepping in and advocating for the people of Gaza is actually working. And so I know that if you're here today, I'm imagining that you are the type of person who has contextualized this moment long before October 7th. That this isn't something that popped up to you or was of interest to you in the last 2 weeks, that you've probably heard about what's been happening in Gaza. You've probably been aware of what the siege in Gaza for the last 16 plus years, and you've known about the inhumane conditions that the people of Gaza have been living in. And now we're actually in live in real time watching this genocide happen. And it's hard to comprehend, but we know that we need to keep pushing, and we know that we need to keep doing what we can and putting the pressure again on those who are in power to do the work. So for those who are maybe stepping into this for the first time and advocating on an issue like this for the first time, I know that I love to say that I want folks to contact Congress, but I want to kind of take a step back and say why. And we know that Congress and the President of the United States have incredible amount of power and influence over what happens in the region. And we understand that first and foremost, that Israel has the power that it has because of the level of unconditional aid that the United States has provided to Israel over the course of the last few decades. I mean, 75 years we're talking about here. And so it's really important to recognize that the United States plays an incredible role in the apartheid state and has actually really undermined the dignity and the humanity of the Palestinian people. And so as we assess that power and we understand what power Congress and the president have, we know that it's our duty to ensure that we influence and target Congress to actually take a stand with the American people. Sandra shared at the beginning of her presentation that most people want a ceasefire. I mean, one of our demands long before then was the fact that we were calling to the end of military funding, because we knew that if we continued offering this $3.8 billion a year, unconditionally, unequivocally, we knew that at one point or another that Israel would remain remain this apartheid state, would remain doing these atrocious things to our people, whether it was across Gaza or the West Bank, without any level of accountability, as we understood that the money was consistently rolling in from the United States to the Israeli government, again, with no questions asked, no level of accountability, be it coming from the United States or any other international, institution, and could be permitted to continue doing what it's already been doing. And now we're seeing this unfold, and we're still seeing, statements by our president who are, making statements around like, we still stand with Israel, that we are still standing this, but yet the American public is really shifting in the direction of where we're all, positioning ourselves, and that's to position ourselves in favor of the Palestinian people. And so I'm just deeply grateful for the fact that, we're in a place where we are seeing this resonate amongst the general public. We are seeing it happen across the international community, really. And the amounts of pictures that I'm hoping folks have already been able to see regarding the mobilizations, the tens of thousands of people, the 300,000 that showed up in London, the 10,000 showed up in DC. There are so many mobilizations that have been happening since October 7th as a reminder to the international community that most people do actually stand with the people of Gaza and with the people across the rest of Palestine. And it's our duty and it's our responsibility to continue pushing for that. And so many of our organizations, and I'll speak again for the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, have been trying our best to help people kind of digest that information. As we understand, Congress can sometimes be quite a whole, and it's really difficult to grasp and comprehend what's going on. So we want to make it easy for you. Sandra shared a great tool for folks to call and email their members of Congress, and we too are doing the same. And the hope is that if we have multiple tools, we can access a much wider base, right? Like there are many times across our movement where we work together, and there are many times where even in the action tools, despite the fact that they may look slightly different, are targeting the same people. So in this case, what I'm presenting to you here is actually a Gaza call tool. So this tool itself would actually provide you a script once you click on the link and actually allow you to call your legislator directly, making it really easy for you. We have a whole script in line. We want to make sure that folks find it easy. We understand that the information can sometimes be all over the place, but we really wanted to help folks synthesize what we specifically are asking our legislators for, and making the call right now in this moment to call for that ceasefire. So it's something that I think that, again, is really important. We hope that folks can continue using. This is just kind of a snapshot of what it looks like when you click it. The tool itself actually lists out a number of resources and links that I'll kind of go through over the course of the next few slides. And this specific screenshot actually shows you the tools and the links that, again, if you want to go back, it's uscpr.org/Gaza call. That's our call tool. But if you want to go into the resource and toolkit, If you go to this link, uscpr.org/stopgazagenocide, you'll be able to find a list of resources that we've been able to kind of put together and encourage folks to use so that we can, again, make sure that we're making these constant calls to Congress and we're making these emails to Congress. So depending on what you're comfortable with, and maybe what your host of friends are comfortable with, as we are encouraging folks to share out these tools and resources with people, we want to make sure that you have everything readily available for you. And we promise you, we are making sure that it's up to date. We're making sure that it's, it's working effectively and that it's as easy as possible for folks. So this is a resource that's been made available to folks. And again, you can take your time to read through these things. I won't go into details to what the scripts say, but again, it's easily available and ready to go for folks that are willing to use it. And we are encouraging people to do it at all times of the day, every single day. We can't stop. We must flood the inboxes, whether they be email or phone inboxes in the legislators' offices around demanding a ceasefire. We know that we have two extremely tireless advocates that have been really helping shape the demand here for a ceasefire, and that's Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib. We are so appreciative for them, and that incredible amount of effort that we people have actually been able to cultivate, and the numbers of, we've now made hundreds of thousands of calls, we've sent hundreds of thousands of emails. The reality is that is actually working. So even though we started off with a ceasefire resolution that only had 2 folks on it, it's now around somewhere between 18 to 20 legislators who have signed on it. And then that didn't just happen in a vacuum. That happened because people were calling. That happened because legislators were now hearing, oh, my constituents care about this. So it's a really important, vital time for us to constantly encourage, and not to be discouraged by the small number, but rather encouraged by the fact that people are actually signing on, doing this work because they're hearing from folks, and they're also scared. I think that, Sandra talked a little bit about some demonstrations that have been happening in offices. And as a reminder that it's our duty to place this sort of responsibility on these legislators to make sure that they meet this demand and that we would accept nothing less. Right now we're asking for a ceasefire because that's what the people of Gaza need. We have a whole list of demands that we want to ask for, but in this exact moment, we're asking for a ceasefire, and that's what we want to continue asking for. This is a little bit of a screenshot of what it looks like. Again, I'll allow folks to kind of take their time to look at it. If there are questions, happy to answer them as we go. Another tool that we've been also really encouraging folks, I think many people understand that we are encouraging everyone to share out as much information as possible across your social media platforms, whether that be Facebook, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, like whatever you have. I know they're also called many different things right now, whether it's X or Meta, whatever you want to call it. We are trying our best to ensure that folks are sharing out all these sorts of resources across social media. The reality is the repression right now is real. And we want to make sure that we're using all outlets possible to ensure that folks are actually getting access to these resources. So our hope is that you can actually take these links and send them to your friends and have your friends send them to your friends. And the hope there is that no matter what level of shadow banning exists across social media, we can actually ensure that this information is becoming accessible and readily available to people. And we know people text. We know that this happens. I know that if you're on your phone, you're probably also texting a friend. So the hope is that you can take this information, drop that link in the text thread, and make sure that they have this information readily available to them. It's all accessible via computer, phone, like whatever you want to use, it's all accessible. And we've already made that available to you. And we're happy to even go step by step as to how you want to set that up, what sort of text message you want to send. We really want to make sure that as many people as possible are using these tools because it's absolutely crucial right now. One thing that we want to build off of is the momentum that so many incredible organizations, Adala Justice Project is an incredible organization that's been leading on all these phenomenal demonstrations across Capitol Hill and in district. And one thing that we want to encourage folks to do is to do these sorts of demonstrations themselves. I promise you that many of us are at capacity right now, but it doesn't mean we're going to quit, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to do anything. It means that we're just going to push and we're going to encourage folks to do those things alongside us. So one thing that we actually made, as far as USCPR goes, made available on our Instagram, and was just a post that we posted a couple of hours ago. So if you actually go to USCPR on our Instagram page, you'll find all these sorts of visuals with all this information, so you can share it out, you can look at it yourself, whatever you want. But one thing that we really want to build up towards, especially since we were leading towards this national march on Saturday, November 4th, is a list of actions that we could potentially pursue as folks are kind of flooding the streets of Washington, D.C., are considering ramping up their efforts in their own local areas. And so we're launching what we're calling the Week of Action for Gaza this upcoming week. The first thing that we're asking folks to do is to do in-district visits at the rep's office. We know that, again, a lot of the efforts have been made on Capitol Hill, and that remains to be an incredibly important thing. But we also know many people can't be in DC, but that doesn't stop us from being able to influence our electeds in their own regions. And sometimes it's actually far more critical for folks to meet with their constituents in their constituent offices. And so we're encouraging folks to set up a local demonstration to pressure their member of Congress. And we're happy to help you. So if this is something that's of interest to you and you want to participate in, or you just need some support in figuring out how to structure that out, like, we want to be of a resource to you and we want to support you in that. Additionally, we're looking to schedule a phone bank. So we also want to kind of just be partners in this. We really want to be neighbors. We want to make sure that it's easy. So if it's maybe easier for you to set an hour aside and join us for a power hour to discuss and how to go through the phone script and how to make those phone calls, then we encourage you to join us. We'll make sure that that information is available to you on our websites, as well as on our Instagram, and we're happy to text y'all to make sure that you get the up-to-date information as to what latest actions are happening. Again, we really want to make this as easy as possible for folks, so we're hoping that even if we set aside an hour online, you can join us and we can make the calls together. Sometimes it's just more helpful to be in the same room together. The second, we really want to encourage folks that can, and understand that it's not always possible, but that can, to arrive in DC a couple days before the November 4th march. Our hope there is to, again, put that pressure on Congress. The hope is that maybe a ceasefire can happen before then, but if it doesn't, that we want to ensure that our Congress is hearing us loudly and understands that this is still a demand that we are making for the people of Gaza. And so one thing that we want to encourage is for folks to actually meet up with us a couple of days before and join us for these sorts of actions so that we can talk through what's going on and maybe set up some meetings that you have with your member of Congress while you're here. The more people power that we have in these efforts, the better. The more packed a room becomes, the better. The more voices that they hear, the better. And again, we want to make sure that that's available to you. And we're in the midst of right now organizing all of this and encourage y'all, again, if you're planning on being in DC for this upcoming weekend's actions, to join us a couple of days before then, if you can, for these lists of actions. And you can hit us up on USCPR, and I'll also drop maybe an email at the end as well for folks who may need it. Again, the last thing, as Sandra said, is the Washington DC march, but there are also many other marches that are happening. And so one thing that we've actually tried to do is continue to compile a list of all those protests and demonstrations that are happening. They are happening really fast. So one, we want to make sure that we're up to date as much as possible. Our team is doing their best in making sure that this information that you find at this link is not only accessible, but also up to date. So if you don't happen to see something that you're looking for, or if you knew of a protest that you don't necessarily see on this list, we encourage you to reach out to us and let us know that immediately so we can, make sure that it's on this list. This will continue being updated as demonstrations and protests are happening, and many are happening. I know that one, for instance, just popped up in the last couple of hours, since there's been so much more escalation in Gaza in just the last few hours here in DC, even though there wasn't one this morning. And so things are popping up really quickly, and we want to make sure that this resource is available to you. So if you're looking for something in your own locality, or if you're looking for something in DC, in the DMV, let us know, and you might find it here. And if you don't, let us know, and we'll be happy to look up to see if there's anything else that's popped up. And then the last thing I want to mention is just, again, this is a really critical time for us to demand justice for Gaza. We are demanding a ceasefire in this immediate moment. We will call for a ceasefire. We will not stop until it happens. And we really want to make sure that we're doing our best in pulling through for our community back home in Gaza. For people like Jihad who have family back in Gaza, it is our duty and our responsibility to pull through. I promise you that we will not stop until we make sure that this happens. But even long after this ceasefire, we want to make sure that we're pushing against any additional military spending to Israel, as we know that if that continues, we'll only continue fueling this system of violence. So our hope is that you can join us not only for the short term, but also for the long term. We promise that organizations like ours are going to make sure that we have the information up to date, that our demands are updated, and we make it as easy as possible for you to plug in, because we know that the wider this movement becomes, and it's huge. I want to acknowledge how big this movement has become. As a Palestinian, I have been so moved and so emotional with the level of commitments people have made, and I so appreciate everyone coming up and showing up every single day to demonstrations, but also making these calls. I see y'all. We see the numbers growing. We're hearing from staffers on the Hill, as well as members on the Hill, that their inboxes are flooded, and we know that you are listening, you are doing this, and we hope that the people of Gaza, we're trying our best to ensure that for as long as we can communicate out with the people of Gaza, that we are making sure that they know that the people across this country, as well as the international community, are doing all that they can. And we want to make sure that, again, we have y'all join us in this fight for the long term. So we hope that you could use our resources, again, either from USCP or Adala, and like make sure that you're supporting these organizations as well as Jihad's organization. Jerusalem Center is doing a phenomenal job, and I want to make sure that we're doing all that we can for one another. So I'll stop with that.
سهل بعدك ما بيهون وزاد الحمل علي ليل نهاري شوقك يا بلوم يا بكتم جواي مشتاق زي طلع عليك النوم سهرانة طول الليل وبفكر فيك مشتاق زي ليش أدوق الحب اليوم وانت هناك وأنا هون أنا حظي أضيع بهواك وأتوه وأعيش بلك ليه بالك مكان هالقد بعيد هالقد بعيد أنا حظي أضيع بهواك وأتوه وأعيش بلك وأنا مالي لي أحب بعيد أحب بعيد
حبيبتي أنا فاهمك ويا ريتني أنا سابقك I know you see the follow back so I know switch هذا بنفسك You know I come alive in the moonlight Quand tu rentres dans mes bras c'est la low life I can't let nobody get in our way 10 hours but it's never too late so baby
مشتاق زي
مشتاق أنا ماسك فيكي مشتاق أنا ماسك فيها
مشتاق زي
ليش أدوق الحب اليوم وانت هناك وأنا هون
أنا حظي أضيع بهواك وأتوه وأعيش بلك ليه بالك مكان هالقد بعيد هالقد بعيد
أنا حظي أضيع بحناكي وأفي وأنا مني معاكي وأنا مالي لي أحب بعيد أحب بعيد
لو يحميني قلبي ونسيني بعد المشوار لو يكفيني الكلام يرضيني لو ما نختار ألم المسار أنا حظي أضيع بهواك وأتوه وأعيش بلك ليه بالك مكان هالقد بعيد هالقد بعيد أنا حظي هواك الله معك ما بستنى ترضيني كل ما تسكر باب بيفتح باب أنا مش أسفة حبيبي لا يهمني الغياب لا يهمني العتب ما بيعنيلي ما تعد الأسباب ما تهمني الأسباب ما بترويني وأنا لا مش حمل أسمع كلام وأنا ما حعيد نفس الأيام أنت وأنا هم وبلا وقلبي دليل وأنا قلبي أنا ضايع مني سنين وأنا ذنبي أنا إني تحملت كتير وأنا عمري أنا لازم إني أعيش تعيش هواك وأعيش هواك وأنا قلبي أنا ضايع مني سنين وأنا ذنبي إني تحملت كتير وأنا عمري أنا لازم إني أعيش تعيش هواك وأعيش
قربك على درب الهوى روحي أنا بشوقي لتبوح يا كاسي قلبي لا تهجرني وتروح قربك على درب الهوى روحي أنا بشوقي لتبوح يا كاسي قلبي أنا يا سالم من الروح قالوا لي يومي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى فينا يلي ما وفى فينا قالوا لي يومي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى يلي من الشفا بلسان العسل بتصير كيف الشوق بحريق وانا عايش بوهم الخيال ويا ما ضحكت كتير عحالي بلا تفكير ويا ما اشكي بس بالاخير ونعيد عالموال شوي وبالهدى تعرف بطريقك دون حدا وما في ولا نجم بهالسما كل الطريق لنرجع سوا قولي حبيبي قولي لو اي كلمة لو اي نسمة حسسني اني ما غشني قلبي بسحر الهوى قالوا لي يومي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى فينا قالوا لي يومي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى يلي من الشفا واللي غواني تركني بحالي بس ما نساني وعدوا ببالي هوا قالوا لي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى فينا قالوا لي يومي بيوم عليك ولي من وعد حبك يلي ما وفى يلي من الشفا
ما تخليني استنى واتمنى انك رح تتفنن تتونس بي. ما هي الورد اللي حتكفي، ماني فاضية تتحسر لي، حتى وانك الطويل الحليوة وصاحب الهبة. انا مالي عالغمار، انا واهلي ما مر علينا، تلت الدنيا تطلب فينا وانت لسه ياما بتخازل بتقول لولا حياتنا يمنا عيون الساحرة نتلو لحلى حالنا شوفوا هالمهضوم بتلولح معانا رجعنا تفعلها. قاويها ارفعي راسك يا مرفوعة الراسي، قاويها لا بيكي مقالة ولا مثل ما قالوا الناسي، قاويها ارفعي راسك ولا ابوكي قولي له، قاويها احنا الذهب والناس لباس وانت لسه ياما بتخازل بتقول لولا حياتنا يمنا عيون الساحرة نتلو لحلى حالنا شوفوا هالمهضوم بتلولح معانا رجعنا تفعلها.
كل شي مخبى باليسطو، قدري رماني والقدر يطبطب عالمكتوب، يكتب ويناجي أشكي عن حالي من مكتوب بسطر قلم ووجع. يا ناسي أنا مجبور فيش مهرب ما فيش عتاب، يا مشاغل بالي معاك خلي وخلاني وانا قلبي لك انكتب عنواك. وياك في نهاري وفي ليلي وفي الماضي أنا وياك، في حربي وفي سلمي وفي الحاضر أنا وياك، وانت عمري وانت عيني يا خلي أنا انت، وانا وانت بيد دربي أنا بلادك أنا وياك. ياما كنت حالي همي قاتلني داري وناما، كل حالك همي همك يغلى غالي، عالمي شيطان ملاك والناس دي ما تشوف الفروق، يا ملاك لو يومي خاب نفسي ضنك ما يشوف، يا مشاغل بالي معاك خلي وخلاني وانا قلبي لك انكتب عنواك. وياك في نهاري وفي ليلي وفي الماضي أنا وياك، في حربي وفي سلمي وفي الحاضر أنا وياك، وانت عمري وانت عيني يا خلي أنا انت، وانا وانت بيد دربي أنا بلادك أنا وياك. قلبي مرسلي بهموم وانا ذنبي بحاري، وانا قلبي ضرب ناري يا دنيا خبي اسراري، لا ما العشرة هاي بتهون وانت عشرة ايامي، يبقى هالزمن قاسي يبقى قلبنا وياك، في نهاري وفي ليلي وفي الماضي انا وياك، في حربي وفي سلمي وفي الحاضر انا وياك، وانت عمري وانت عيني يا خلي انا انت، وانا وانت بيد دربي انا بلادك انا وياك.
كوكب كبسة تزمل رمضان وعدوا للبيت لا تحسن جوك، 4 حبات 4 حبات و7 بالزيف، بوع بقوم وغيب والحباب لساني بيسلق كانه يمين، كلكو بالصوت تغيبنا هش ولا صوت نعرج نحكي بس في وصوت في الشعب العربي تحول أول تاني عيش بتهبل قلبي حشر كله وتفزر الله وحده عارف شو بطحن طوحن قابض ضلك عالصومت خوبت كسر الظابط
فيضان في شتاء ناس تتخبى في ثلوج وهواء نلغي طلعات جيب أكيد منفعش جيب كم حبة داوين قد ناس صحبة بطل يروح ما بعد الروح إيش أغلى تحت تروب نكمل رحلة قد ما تحد تنوب محسوب لك قد ما تهد بيوت راح تبنى
بحب زيتون المس بصح ليش الناس تحبها بتغدرك شو هيك إن الناس تعبانة كتير بتتعب صاحبي خطير على 12 بطل يحكي صاحبي حب شعره كتير بطل يحلك تشتي الدنيا تسكي فلفل اخضر ولا بطل يحلك هتتماسك امل تفرق السطر ما بطل تفرق في النهاية كله رايح فلنحارب حتى نفلي هو الصوت في اداء نيكلور مين هاد رمضان ما بتجيش ببلاش طوفون فيضان في زجاج يتناثر بكورولا بيضة نتكاثر قديش الدنيا
فيضان في شتاء ناس تتخبى في ثلوج وهواء نلغي طلعات جيب أكيد منفعش جيب كم حبة داوين قد ناس صحبة بطل يروح ما بعد الروح إيش أغلى تحت تروب نكمل رحلة قد ما تحد تنوب محسوب لك قد ما تهد بيوت راح تبنى
وردة في جنينة
تبنى
For the people that never believe, look at you now. I keep a couple of people around and I'm making them proud, yeah. Came with a message that God gave me and I'm holding it down. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. شايف حبيب بالمراية بيومي تصل فيه روثة بالشد نازل على الاسكندرية تدور الجورة العربية طاع شون القلبية حاس علي عبد الناصر مخي تسوي دولة واحدة عربية تقن دوري عالسينة بارو باي وحسينة كل شي اللي فازدينة فين 48 One wrong move and he end up on the floor Watch out for that gonna fall Alhamdulillah This for the people that never believe Look at you now I keep a couple of people around and I'm making them proud, yeah. Came with a message that God gave me and I'm holding it down. Alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah. The label just offered me 200K cause they see me advance. But I'm still running solo, I'm touring like Colo, I'm loving the fans. I'm right on my wave, I do it again and again. This is 2048, taking back the motherland. I see myself bigger than just a mic. I see myself bigger than just a rhyme. Like I'm the girl, see the light in my eyes. Chocolate, one finger to the sky.
One finger to the sky.
2 airs to the moon.
3rd generation high.
4th quarter على طول.
5 people in the zone.
6 figures coming soon.
7 women in the moon.
8 dinners in the room.
9 carats in the jewels.
10 commandments in the tomb.
Alhamdulillah. This for the people that never believe. Look at you now. I keep a couple of people around and I'm making them proud, yeah. Came with a message that God gave me and I'm holding it down. Alhamdulillah.
عايزة